Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 491st meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We have to know ahead of time what we're going to talk about. We give them up to an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter we listen only one fool at a time, one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience of the speaker, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience at once who gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said, for or against. And the speaker is the last word, gets a comment, close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements? Now's the time to do it. Any announcements?
Yeah, I got.
Come on up here. Make it.
Philosophers Forum is meeting this week, and Steve Sverdlik, a professor at SMU, he's been there since like 1982 for quite some time. He's going to be talking about utilitarianism, and Jeremy Bentham, who I think was the originator of utilitarianism as a philosophy. And this is pretty much bread and butter philosophy, just basic stuff. So if you're interested, and by the way, utilitarianism is basically saying you figure out the best way to deal with something and then you deal with it, whereas a deontological approach, it says the rules are this and you always follow the rules no matter what. So those are the two basic classes of philosophy, and he's going to be hitting on the utilitarianism. So it's a Boca's family restaurant off of Central and Beltline. Starts at 7:30. You can get there as early as 6 and eat dinner, Italian food, good stuff.
Any other announcements? Now's the time for announcements. Any other announcements? All right. Well, next week is Dale Klosterman. You're going to talk about is China spreading its control over the entire Pacific Basin. It's on your itinerary here. I won't read all this. And February 22nd. Abe Garcia is going to talk about the importance of creativity. That's also on your itinerary. And February 29th, I don't have it, it's not on here yet, but Daniel Perlehy is a doctor. He had brain injury years ago. He's recovered quite well now, and he's going to talk about the problems of how to prevent prevention of disease rather than treating disease after it happens. So it ought to be interesting. It's on February 29th. It'll be on the website probably in a day or so. Anyway, our speaker tonight is Jian Li. She's a PhD in anthropology and a Mandarin teacher. She's going to talk about on the power of belief. She will explain how the power of belief from different perspectives, including her own. She argues that we can all benefit from examining our own beliefs in the beginning of the new year for personal growth, happiness, fulfillment, and a sense of purpose and meaning in life. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Jian Li.
Thank you.
Oh, yours.
Thank you.
You want this? Take it.
My talk is inspired by this book, This I Believe. And This I Believe also was a program from PBS, Public Radio. How many of you have heard This I Believe from PBS Radio? It ran several years, and then finally they put up this book. I was in a Barnes & Noble library bookstore, and I found this book, and I bought a book and read a book. So this talk is kind of like inspired by this book, and I thought this is a topic I've been thinking for a while, like what do I believe? And I thought it's kind of boring to talk about my belief. It will be more interesting to introduce different people who have written about their beliefs, and then finally I will introduce my belief. So this is an excellent book, and I'm going to select a few of the authors from this book to talk about their views, and then I will introduce mine. I used to be very skeptical about the word belief. If I know, I know it. If I don't know, why should I make a leap of faith, go past my rational mind and enter into an irrational realm of believing? For example, I know 1 + 1 is 2. Do I have to believe it? How about God? Does God exist? I don't know. Why should I make a leap of faith and say I believe or not believe in God? A few years ago, I tried to figure out what I could believe that's both true and meaningful. I came up with 2 answers. First, everything in the world is constantly changing. You can't step into the same river twice, as a Greek philosopher famously said. This is also reflected in a concept of impermanence in the Buddhist teachings. Suffering is caused by the attachment to the impermanent nature of things and people. If you want to hang on to the things that's impermanent, you will get frustrated. It might cause suffering. Secondly, everyone will die eventually. I was happy that I found something I could believe for a while, until I was challenged by someone from CIS, Center of Spiritual Living. Some of you may have heard. I used to visit for a while. He challenged me by asking, "Are you sure everyone will die? Really, really die?" I knew his subcontext. He believed in some kind of reincarnation, and I questioned how we would know for sure where our spirit or soul might go after we pass away from this world. I thought about it and decided he probably had a point. So out of reason and respect, I have withdrawn my second statement of my belief. Then I was left with only one belief. Everything in the world is constantly changing. I still believe in this statement, but this is not completely satisfying and inspiring. One day last year, I was browsing books in Barnes & Noble, and I saw this book, This I Believe, The Personal Philosophies of Remarkable Man or Woman, forwarded by Stutz Turkel. He is an oral historian, and this is the book. And the book was edited by Jay Allison and Dan Gaiman from NPR. I was intrigued and bought the book. After reading the book, I have changed the way I think about the beliefs. So here I am to share with you what I've learned from the book. First, I'll start with Stutz Turkel. He is a Pulitzer Prize writer and a historian. He did a lot of oral history. He wrote a foreword for the book, This I Believe. Here is an excerpt from his foreword. He said, "I find the labels liberal and conservative of little meaning. Our language has become perverted along the thoughts of many of us. So I declare myself a radical conservative. Radical as in getting to the roots of things. I am a conservative in that I'm out to conserve the blue of the sky, the freshness of the air, of which we have less and less. First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, and whatever semblance of sanity we may have left. I secretly envy those who believe in a hereafter and with the idea that once again meet dear ones. They cannot prove beyond a doubt there is such a place. Neither can I disprove it. I cannot find the bookmaker willing to take my bet on it. How will one who guesses right be able to collect his winnings? So speaking on behalf of the bookies of the world, all bets are off. And yet there is something which I believe with no uncertainty. There is something we do while we are alive and breathing on this planet. This is to become an activist in the pursuit of a world in which it will be easier for people to behave decently. So my credo of the pursuit and act, one without the other is self-indulgence. This I believe. And this is by Studs Terkel. Studs Terkel wrote his beliefs with clarity, humor, and personal conviction, something I feel I can totally identify with. One of the most refreshing essays in the book is Be Cool to the Pizza Dude by Sarah Adams. She wrote, I have one operating philosophy about life. It is this: be cool to the pizza delivery dude. It's good luck. 4 principles guide the pizza dude philosophy. Principle 1. Coolness to the pizza delivery dude is practiced in humility and forgiveness. Principle 2. Coolness to the pizza delivery dude is a practice in empathy. Principle 3. Coolness to the pizza delivery dude is practice in honor, and it reminds me to honor honest work. Principle 4. Coolness to the pizza delivery dude is a practice in equality. Tip him well, friends and brothers, for that which you bestow freely and willingly will bring you all the happy luck that a grateful universe knows how to return. Although Sarah Adams has never delivered pizza, she has held many jobs in her life, including telemarketer, factory worker, hotel clerk, and a flower shop as cashier. Having had these jobs made her more compassionate for people working in the service industry. At the time of writing, she is an English professor of Olympic College in Washington. Well, that also explains why she was able to articulate her thoughts in such a beautiful and eloquent way. The most humorous and touching story from the book is Finding Prosperity by Feeding a Monkey by Harold Town. He was originally from Burma, so he had a unique take on life. I could say that I believe in America because it rewarded my family's hard work to overcome poverty. I could say that I believe in holding on to rituals and traditions because they helped us to flourish in a new country. But these concepts are more concretely expressed this way. I believe in feeding monkeys on my birthday, something I've done without fail for 35 years. When I was born, a blind Buddhist monk living alone in the Burmese jungle predicted that my birth would bring great prosperity to the family. To ensure the prosperity, I was to feed monkeys on my birthday. And he gives several examples of trying to fulfill his promises to feed monkeys on his birthday. He said when he was in Burma, the monkeys was all around, like if you could feed monkeys anytime, but in the US, sometimes it's hard for him to go to a zoo and to feed monkeys. It's not something that you're allowed to do. So he had to find different ways to find a pet someone who owns a monkey as a pet. He would beg him to give him the opportunity to feed. And one time he said he was like going to feed a pet monkey, and people thought he was a animal rights activist and was going to throw him out. But he tried every way to fulfill his promise, and he has done that without fail for 35 years. So that's pretty impressive. He said, our family has prospered in America. I believe that I've ensured this prosperity by observing our family ritual and feed monkeys on my birthday. Do I believe it literally? Maybe. But I have faith in my family, and I believe in honoring the faith in any way I can. Well, Harry Tao provided one of the most humorous and touching stories. The great historian Arnold Toynbee wrote one of the most profound essays on his belief, titled, I Agree with a Pagan. He said, I believe there may be some things that some people may know for certain, but I also believe that these noble things are not matters most to any human being. A good mathematician can know truth about numbers, and a good engineer may know how to make physical forces serve his purposes. But the engineer and the mathematicians are human beings first. So for them, as well as for me, what matters most is not one's knowledge and skill, but one's relation with other people. We do not have to be engineers or mathematicians, but we all do have to deal with each other, which are really important things in life, are also the really difficult things, because it is here that the question of right and wrong comes in. I believe that everything worth winning does have its price, suffering. And I know, of course, where this belief of mine comes from. It comes from the accident of my having been born in this country where the local religion has been Christianity. Another belief that I owe to Christianity is a conviction that love is what gives life its meaning and purposes, and that suffering is profitable when it is met in the cause of following one's love's lead. But I can't honestly call myself a believing Christian in the traditional sense. To imagine that one's own church, civilization, nation, or family is the chosen people, yes, I believe, as wrong as it would be for me to imagine that I myself am God. I agree with Symmachus, the pagan philosopher, who put a case for tolerance to a Victorian Christian church, and I will end by quoting his words. The universe is too great a mystery for there to be only one single approach to it. Being a Christian and great scholar of world history, best known for his 12-volume A Study of History, Toynbee is very knowledgeable about world history, and I found it rather moving by learning his openness and courage to declare he was closer to a pagan philosopher than the mainstream believers. In a world that is increasingly polarized by extreme views, we should all be reminded that the universe is too great a mystery for there to be only one single approach to it. The last author from the book I'll cite is Frank Walker, professor of English, who reminded us that the quality of life is not determined by titles and wealth, but by the creativity at work. I believe that the highest quality of life is full of art and a creative expression, and that all people deserve it. I believe in a broad definition of what art is and what artists are. Barbers, cooks, auto detailers, janitors, and gardeners have as much right to claim of artistry as designers, architects, painters, and sculptors. Every day, our streets and school buses become art galleries in the form of perfectly spiked hair, zigzagging cornrows, and dizzying shoelace artistry. Celebrating creativity around us help us maintain our sanity and keep us happy. Walker reminded us that no matter who we are, what we do for a living, we all have the potential of living a life filled with creativity and grace. After reading these reflections of different beliefs, I realized that the most profound beliefs do not necessarily have to do with believing or not believing in a supernatural deity, but rather personal convictions of the guiding principles in our life. So, what is the guiding principle in my life, or what do I believe? I believe in curiosity that opens the door for me to see the wider world, that keeps me young by always wanting to learn and experience something new, that elevates my spirit when the darkness occasionally slips into my consciousness. It was the curiosity that prompted me to learn English as second language by listening to an English course from a radio program when I was about 13 years old in Shanghai. It was also curiosity that prompted me to enter a PhD program in Southern Illinois University when I knew hardly anything about anthropology. It was also the curiosity that opened the door for me to be a teacher from elementary school to middle school to high school and college and beyond. It is also the curiosity that brought me here to share this speech with you. I believe in curiosity that keeps us open-minded, invigorated, and forever young, at least young at heart. What is your belief? Does your belief change over the years? How does your belief guide and serve you in your life? By examining our own beliefs, it could help us for personal growth, happiness, fulfillment, and a sense of purpose and a meaning in life. And that's it.
Well, now you get to stay there and answer questions.
Do you think there's a fundamental truth?
Fundamental truths about?
Well, about living and life.
Fundamental truths about living in life. That's too general. I think I agree with the Tonabe's reminding us the world is too much a mystery, for there's only one approach to life, to exploring. There are different ways of exploring the world, but if there's one fundamental truth about life, I would say life is sacred, and we all need to protect life, not only human lives, but also lives of other animals as much as we can.
You said that it's not necessary to believe in God, basically, I think. Something to that effect, anyway. I read a study by J.D. Unwin. He published it in 1934 called Sex and Culture. He analyzes a bunch of different cultures, and every culture he analyzed had some concept of the power in the universe. I mean, to explain the things that they couldn't figure out. Do you not think that there is some transcendental truth that is over and above everything that we believe, that has some effect on what we believe? Or do you think we can simply dismiss the idea of God or anything transcendental and just deal with what we see here?
It is true that anthropologists have studied different cultures and found almost all the cultures in the world have some kind of religious beliefs. But the kind of religious beliefs differ from culture to culture. And the concept of God also differ from culture to culture. In Buddhism, the supernatural, the deity, is different from in Christianity or Islam or Hinduism. So there's also a definition of what is God or supernatural. There is one of the topics that I give here, and the topics I'm interested in, is what makes us human. The best explanations I've heard is from Yuval Harari, who wrote 2 books. One is The History of Humankind, another is Homo Deus, The Humans of Tomorrow. And I think he argued that what makes us human is that humans tell stories and believe in our stories. So religion, in this line of thinking, is a very good example of we make stories that we believe in. Say, dogs, cats, other animals, they react like by instinct. They would not believe in a supernatural deities. They don't create fantastic stories. They may have stories we don't really know, but not elaborate as human stories. And Harari also said there are a lot of stories that we make to make up like human lives, and the other example is money. Money, dollars, we have confidence that it's worth something, but in itself it's a piece of paper. If we all lose confidence in dollar bill, then dollars don't worth anything. We all buy into a story of money, a story of a supernatural deity, and we make very elaborate stories. It's not particularly good, not particularly bad, it's just the way that human brains do. So I think that's a very good theory.
Would you be at a place where you would have an opinion and be able to give an answer whether atheism is a belief system?
Of course, atheism is a belief system. Believing in God or not believing in God, they are all belief systems.
Does it rise to the level of a religion?
It could. It could if it's kind of militant atheist. It could. So my position is, like I said in the beginning, I don't know. There is one, there is not one. So if I put a label, nowadays my beliefs have changed over the years. So nowadays I might say I'm a mystic. I'm a mystic in the sense that I'm open to mysteries in the world, but I don't claim I know there is a particular God or not. To me, it's unknowable, and I'm being honest.
What is the place in your belief of paranormal phenomena? Do you admit that it exists?
It's kind of in the realm of unknown, but I've read enough to have great respect for paranormal phenomenon because I have read, I've met people, I've met also kind of scientists in this area who did experiments and who taught me that it exists, but personally I haven't experienced. So I have great respect for people who explore, but I don't believe or not believe things that I don't know for sure.
Would you be willing to wager a bet that paranormal phenomenon exists?
It's very likely.
If paranormal phenomenon exists, would that mediate or modify your belief?
It might. It might. I think rationally, I think rationally it's kind of hard to see like strong evidence, but emotionally I probably wish that it exists. It probably is more interesting that if it existed, but I just haven't experienced, but I've read and heard enough that, and I know the universe is so vast, the mystery is so vast, so there's a high probability that exists.
Have you ever visited a location that felt to you like it was haunted, or that it was a very misfortunate place, or maybe even a fortunate place? Do you have any experience of that?
Like deja vu, like people say deja vu. Probably I had, but there are a lot of different theories to explain. It could be something something like sixth sense, or it could be something deep in your subconscious that you were not aware, you couldn't make connections. So I don't know which one is which. I guess I'm kind of skeptical of many things, but I'm also open enough to want to see evidences, to open up our mind to see a more extraordinary world.
Have you ever experienced, or do you know of people who've experienced things that apparently would violate the so-called laws of physics and physiology?
Well, I guess if you look at the totality of my life experience, the totality of everyone I know, I would say yes. But the difficult thing is, like the scientific principle is something that's provable and repeatable. The paranormal, extraordinary things are kind of like, usually it's not provable or repeatable. But not provable or repeatable may not be, at least to many people, to some people, it may not, it still can be true, right? It can be still true. So in this sense, I would revert to say there are two kinds of truths. There's a physical truth and a psychological truth. We don't have too much arguments about physical truths like gravity, like time. But we do have a lot of controversy about psychological truth. So in this sense, if it's psychologically true to you, that's okay. That might be good for you, but it doesn't mean it's psychologically true to someone else. So if something that's psychologically true to me, I'll pay attention to it, but I will not claim this psychological truth applies to everyone. And sometimes psychological truth might be more important, more significant than physical truth. That the psychological truth brings meaning and purpose to your life, but you can't generalize too much about your psychological truth to everyone else. Then it becomes kind of a religion that preaches these truths that everyone has to believe.
I noticed that you seem to be speaking in terms of psychological truth or physical truth, but I don't think you've heard you mention spiritual truth, which is another category altogether. Is very distinct from what you think is psychological truth or what you think is physical truth. Has the thought ever occurred to you to possibly explore the potential possibility of such a thing as absolute, infinite, and eternal truth? That is true truth, spiritually speaking, that does apply to everyone, absolutely, whether you like it or not, or believe it or not.
Yes, I have thought about this, and that's actually the basis of all religions. Every religion in the world believes that particular religion preaches the spiritual truth that is absolutely true. So in a theoretical level, this is what Yuval Harari says: we human beings are storytelling, myth-making creatures. So because we are storytelling, myth-making creatures, it's just inevitable that we will have that kind of thought. Being a spiritual person is something, to me, is something to do spiritual as materialistic. So if someone who is not totally materialistic, that you seek a spiritual life in art, in music, in helping other people, I would say that person is very spiritual. If a person is immersed in only money-making, comfort, acquiring things, the person is not spiritual. But being spiritual can have different manifestations as long as the person is not totally driven by materialistic pursuit. The person has some kind of spirituality. It doesn't have to be, we all agree, one thing that's spiritual. There are different things can be spiritual. Studying music, studying philosophy, gardening, they are all can be part of being a spiritual person.
On the very edge of the garment of paranormal activity might be considered something called synchronicity, where against all statistical, reasonable, even random event programming, something happens. Have you experienced synchronicity in your life that you recall?
That's hard to say. I would say probably yes. Synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. A meaningful randomness. So things happen, can be random, or some people find a meaning, like why am I here? Like why am I here talking today? Is it random, or they are some kind of synchronicity of some kinds? I don't know. I don't know for sure. I think it's a very interesting topic. There's like fortune telling, divination, I Ching study, that all these there are many of school of thoughts, including Jungian psychology, that that puts a great deal on synchronicity.
Can you tell us about the I Ching?
How many of you are interested to know about I Ching? I Ching is one of the oldest philosophical texts in the world. It was so old that when it started, there was no written language. It was from China, but the written language probably now goes back to about 3,000 to 4,000 years. Before language, there were symbols. So I Ching started like probably 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, before the Chinese characters formed. So the basic symbols were the solid line and the broken line. The broken line is yin and the solid line is yang. So the world is made of yin and yang. The sun is yang and the moon is yin. Male is yang, female is yin. Everything in the universe is an interplay of yin and yang. But yin and yang by itself, they are complementary. They are not like good and evil, nothing good or bad. It's just like you cannot say the sun is good, moon is not good. Man good, woman is complementary. We need the moon, we need the sun, we need a man, we need a woman. So it's complementary. So but I Ching started as like symbols of lines. It doesn't have too much meanings. But throughout Chinese history, 3,000 years, their great scholars and philosophers put their interpretations. And one of the philosophers who put the interpretation is Confucius. So there are layers of, later it started as more symbol without too much ethics, but later on, because of the scholars of Confucius put in ethics, so it comes layers and layers of meanings. And there are two major schools of study I Ching. One school is for divination, and one school is for philosophy. And of course, there's a third school that combines philosophy and divination. There is a I Ching discussion group, mostly like older Chinese men. I've been like going to the I Ching study group with that group of older men and learn something from them. It's quite interesting, but it's kind of very abstract level.
I remember reading years ago about an experiment that scientists in the U.S. Navy were doing. They were trying to train dolphins to do military duties, like stick a bomb on under the hull of a ship or something. they freaked out and shut down the experiment when they realized clearly that the dolphins are far more intelligent than humans. They just don't have the physical abilities that we have. Do you think it's possible that there are a number of different species on the earth that are more intelligent than humans? I mean, there's certainly, like, we know even that cats and dogs have visual and audible ranges beyond ours. They pick up information we can't get.
So first of all, you have to define what the intelligence is. If we have a clear definition of intelligence, then we can compare if they are more intelligent or less intelligent. We don't have a agreed upon intelligence definition, so it'd be very difficult to compare. Of course, many animals have more acute sensory abilities, like they can hear better, that's for sure. They may be able to see better. They may have better sense of directions, like birds' migration, and those are facts. But do they have the ability to make fantastic stories like us? Bertrand Russell said, dogs may bark, dogs may communicate, but dogs cannot tell you his father is poor but honest. And that we can say our fathers, mothers were poor but honest. How many other animals have that kind of abstract level of thinking?
Back to the I Ching, there appears, as someone who has experienced I Ching readings but really not educated about it, it appears that there is a numerological value to many of the I Ching things. Can you explain, kind of walk us through how would you do an I Ching throw? How would you?
That should be another topic. It's hard to say. Like I do it. I sometimes do it for fun, but it's not theoretically. It's a dilemma. I cannot do it for fun. According to the theory, if I do it for fun, then I don't get a real result because I'm not respecting the system. Then I will not get. But I also feel like I don't really know enough to do real serious divination. I don't really believe the divination will tell me the real truth. So I play. And I don't get very good results because I play.
I'm going to recommend everybody read the book Never Cry Wolf. It's a true story of the study of wolves by a Canadian. And he was standing one time on this valley where he was studying a pack of wolves that had a den on the other side of the valley. And there was this fellow who was an Eskimo who had been placed in a wolf's den by his father one day and left all day long. And the mother wolf came over and sniffed him and made sure he was okay, but never bothered him. And he loved wolves and learned a lot about them. And way down the valley, while they were talking, they heard a wolf cry. And then it came kind of like roosters in the morning. It came up the valley, the wolves talking to each other. And pretty soon he turned to them and said, well, I think it's like there are 3 or 4 men walking up the valley. They'll be here in 2 days. And it was exactly right. He had learned to speak wolf, and they learned to put together those ideas in their language.
And your question?
Do you think there's a lot more to the consciousness of animals than we're perceiving?
That's 2 different questions. One question is, do animals have a lot more consciousness than we know? And another is, do we do we have the ability to communicate with the other animals? Do we have kind of communion, sense of communication with other animals? I don't know for sure. I think those are good questions, but I'm not an expert. I think there are a lot more about animals we don't know, and there's a lot more that we can learn and to communicate if we are more sensitive to animals. But to what extent that we can understand and communicate, that's a big question that scientists in the field probably can give you a better answer.
Well, I'm going to dispute the I Ching as play, because I had a reading done for me long distance on the phone when I was facing overwhelming obstacles. And the reading really came through very clear that in fact what I needed to do was in every instance incrementally do the little that I could do, and then things would be more favorable in the future. And so I'm disputing the
No, I'm not saying that it's just play. I'm saying I don't know enough that I do play, but it doesn't mean other people do it as play. And I feel guilty that I would do it as play because I'm not respecting the system. So if I do it as play, I don't get actual accurate readings because I'm limited in my abilities at this time.
I heard or read somewhere that the I Ching is the root basis for all Chinese occult spiritual knowledge, that it actually has a spiritual power, an occultic spiritual power behind it. What have you heard in that respect?
So the only religion in China is Taoism, and Taoism is influenced by I Ching. So I Ching is the oldest kind of spiritual or religious source in Chinese religion or even philosophy. Did I say it before? There are different readings. So one reading is treating I Ching more as a philosophical text. If it's a philosophical text, it kind of opens your mind to think outside of the box. And another way of thinking is to treat it as a divination, a fortune telling. And there are people who have different techniques to make it as fortune telling. And I know someone here in Dallas that he said his divination of fortune telling, the accuracy is about 80%.
It's very good.
That's pretty good, right? But I don't know enough, so I say I do play, and I have ways of play, and I feel guilty about it.
Yes, we know that the Chinese has certain medicines that we don't usually have in the West, like acupuncture and certain use of herbs and so on. Is there any concept of faith healing with that concept that some people have here? Does that occur in Chinese medicine?
Yeah, it does. I think faith healing is also present in every culture, and even in acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, a lot of doctors say that the efficacy is stronger if you believe it works.
Yes.
And I think it's also for any medicine. If you have a positive view that you are going to be healed, you are more likely to be healed. If you are really afraid that you're not going to live very long, and that kind of negative feeling can also impact the outcome. The Chinese doctors say more often than Western doctors that faith in believing acupuncture will work, it works better. If you don't, it might work, it might not work. So,
Yeah, right behind you, Tom. When you're speaking about acupuncture and acupressure, that brings up the issue of reflexology, either hand reflexology, foot reflexology, ideas of the meridians. These all came from China, is that correct?
some from India, meridian, the Indians have chakras, kind of different. Chinese have meridians. I don't know other cultures, but I have a friend, a Romanian scientist. He said when he was in Romania, the Romanian doctors want to do acupuncture, but they couldn't find the meridians. And he is like an electrical engineer, and he feels like I don't quite understand, but the way he explains is like electrical currency has some kind of like relationship with meridians and currencies. So his knowledge of electricity and also his willingness to learn about meridian made it possible for him to invent a pen that can detect meridians. So it's kind of like currency. So in that sense, like it's real because he is like a genius. Like he didn't know Chinese, he didn't know English, he only knew Romanian language, and he looked at a meridian map, and he made a pen to detect the meridians, and he gave to Romanian doctors for free, so they could find acupuncture points and to use it for acupuncture treatments.
You spoke of Taoism, and you've spoken of Confucianism. Can you relate those as far as what is a religion and what is a philosophy? In other words, is Confucianism, would you call that a religion? Or would you, on the scale, if religion is over here and philosophy is over here?
So in textbook, traditionally, it says there are 3 religions in China. Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. That's kind of like textbook definition. In practice, I would say Confucianism is more a system of ethics. It doesn't even rises up to philosophy. It's more ethics. Whereas Taoism rises up to philosophy. It has more abstract, conceptual ideas about the world. The difference between religion, ethics, and philosophy, I think religion goes more to supernatural deity. Ethics goes to more codes of conduct, human relationship. Philosophy is more abstract way of understanding the world. The 3 systems can have elements of all these, but in my view, Confucianism is closer to the ethical standard. Buddhism is more close to religion. It's from India, and Taoism is more a philosophical frame of mind. But in Taoism, there is a folk religion aspect. There is a philosophical aspect to it.
I have a little experience of Tibetan monks, meeting Tibetan monks in India, and then I run into Buddhist community here in Oklahoma and Texas. And my observation is you have the, let's call them the common people, if that's a good word at all. They believe in Buddha, they'll have an image of Buddha there in the temple and so forth, but you get to the, especially the Tibetan monks, they seem to be very, almost, they're looking down on everyone because we don't have their philosophy. I mean, it's kind of an elitism of sort. Do you see that division within Buddhism?
I'm not sure. I'm not too deep into it. I think in every religion there's a tendency of elitism. For me, it's more of a practice than believing. I go to Dallas Meditation Center and we practice sitting meditation, walking meditation. So I think the practice is more important than believing. When you practice, you open your mind and you be kind to other people. It doesn't, like, you don't have to believe, you have to practice when it becomes part of your being.
I was looking at a website the other day. There's a lady who's a therapist, and she was talking about how she has, for some time now, been teaching her patients to think of and express gratitude for the healing that they want, as if it's already here. To be grateful now for that healing. And she's having a much, much higher positive result out of her patients when they do that. Does this indicate to you that thinking, our consciousness may be far more of what is real than everything else around us? Is that a possibility?
It is to some extent. I don't know how much we can generalize. I think a positive outlook in life is very important, but the very reality of today's world is also very real. It depends on what kind of problems we are looking at. In terms of health, I think our mind has a lot of power to make us well or make us sick, because we are body and mind. So I think individually, mind has a lot of potential, but if you look at the real world, look at the greed, look at politics, it's very real. You pray for a more peaceful world, like we can try, but is that the best solution without really putting into some significant action to it? So it depends on what kind of things we are talking about, right?
Yes, would you say on balance, does religion cause more harm than good?
We just talk about this question. I think it does as much good as much harm. I think it's 50-50. We have great art inspired by religion. We have charity of all kinds inspired by religion. We have wars, conflicts inspired by religion, killing inspired by religion. As much good as much bad, just because we are all human.
get to sit down.
Thank you.
That's a real good talk.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, now it's your turn to respond to what the speakers had to say, and you have 5 minutes, whoever wants to get up here. If the speaker said everything, there's no one here. Somebody.
That's highly done.
Well, I advocate for paranormal experience, but there's this problem. I can talk for hours about paranormal experiences I've had, but that's not going to convince John. And it's not going to convince most people who have doubts or have not had any experience of anything. I mean, as far as animals, I was over at, I was renting at that time, and I was over at my landlady's in the living room. Her 2 dogs were in the living room. Well, what I experienced is I experienced seeing Lloyd Selman and hearing him coming into the room singing "Shall We Gather at the River." Whatever the dogs were experiencing, they started barking at the wall, became very agitated, and both of them together dashed out of the room as if they were being haunted. It was very impressive. So I learned Lloyd had had a stroke and died. And Lloyd lives in Arizona. And so, I mean, you can take an experience like that. I had many experiences in India that go way beyond what we consider laws of physics. I witnessed food materialize to feed over 300 people. I saw people miraculously healed. But the only thing I can really prove to you is I can show you my passport that I still retain that has the stamps that show I was there in 71 and 72. So we have this problem. When do we have most paranormal experience, and when do we block paranormal experience? The logical rational mind is a wonderful thing, but one of the problems of the logical rational mind is it's actually a limiting filter, and it helps us process a lot of information and come to needed conclusions and things we need to act upon, but it also tends to trap out a lot of the paranormal experience. So if you're wanting to have paranormal experience, you sit comfortably or even perhaps lie back, not always recommended, but sometimes, and get into, there's a particular state between waking and sleeping that is very key to those experiences. There's one major problem though. You can have a paranormal experience, but then when you come back into the conscious rational mind, it can reject it out of hand. That's why people who wish to promote being able to make and use these kind of experiences is you'll keep a notepad by your bed or your armchair or whatever, and if you get something, you write it down, and then you check with it later and see. That helps anchor it back into that area of the reductionist conscious mind. So we have that as kind of a filter. You know, as far as synchronicity, let me just do a poll of the room. How many in this room thought about calling someone and within that almost very instant received a call from them?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing about half the hands showing up there. And I mean, these kind of things happen all the time. What I liken it to is that, and this has to do with some of the feelings of kind of foundational belief that I studied in India when I was over there, is I believe that the human vehicle is something, let's say as an analogy, it's supposed to operate on about like 800 volts, but currently we're operating on about 9 volts. So you just don't get all of the functionality all of the time. If someone leads a almost near monastic life, they limit the amount of sensory input. They live a very regulated life, regulated diet. Sometimes they can conserve enough of that, let's call it voltage or chi. They can conserve enough of that to be able to operate in some of these areas. And then we get to the consideration of how your belief system assesses what went on. I was talking to a evangelical radio minister one time, and he starts going on, he says, well, the Holy Spirit told me this, and I had this experience, and then I got lifted up, and I said, okay, you just mentioned clairvoyance, clairaudience, out-of-body travel, seeing at a distance, all these different things. No, that was the Holy Spirit that did that. I said, I don't know that. All I know is you're relating things that are categorized as these different paranormal psychic skills. And, he's ready to condemn everything over here that he doesn't fit in his belief system, and he's ready to class everything that happened to him into his belief system in that particular manner. So, we operate inside of paradigms. Sometimes the paradigms are beneficial and help, sometimes they're not.
I find this subject very interesting. Jian's talk was about the power of belief, and we all operate on that. And belief is actually what powers all of us, because none of us really know anything. We operate on what we believe, and because we believe certain things, we act as if that's true. When you sit down in that chair, you have faith that that chair is going to hold you up. It may not. I mean, you may sit down in that chair and, some people have the experience the chair just collapses. So the faith was unfounded in that case. But, when you go out to your car tonight, you have the expectation that it's going to start up and you're going to be able to drive home. But you don't know that for certain. You really don't. So we operate on belief. And speaking of beliefs and ultimate beliefs, I think the ultimate shallowness that I've ever seen is a t-shirt that says, "He who dies with the most toys wins." Well, my first question is, what do you win? I have it's rather doubtful that it's worth much. If you win something, you win, other people say, well, wow, he had a lot of stuff. So what? But one has to ask, what's going to happen to you after you die? This reminds me of an interview I saw with Diane Sawyer interviewed Mel Gibson once, and Mel Gibson was saying, I think this was after the Passion of the Christ, and he was saying, man, I had everything. I had money, I had fame, I had women, I had cars, I had houses, I had everything that anybody could want, and I still felt empty inside. So he was pursuing what he believed. He believed that those things were going to make him happy, and when he got those things, he wasn't happy. Myself, I'm probably as poor as I've ever been in my life. I'm barely making it from month to month, but I'm thrilled to be alive. I have a purpose. I'm excited to get up in the morning and work on things, develop things that are meaningful. And speaking of the paranormal stuff that John was mentioning, this is an area that I'm getting into a little bit now too, and there happens to be quite a few research efforts. Scientific double-blind experiment, verify the experience, record it, see if you can duplicate it, kind of science into soul and consciousness. And if you care to investigate it, there's a website called synchronizeduniverse.com. A guy named Claude Swanson started that. They're researching consciousness. And they've pretty much determined that consciousness is outside of the brain, contrary to the atheist pretensions of understanding everything. And there's all this research that's going on, and I find it quite interesting because I've been looking into what the Bible says about a lot of this stuff. The Bible talks about reincarnation. You know, Jesus says John the Baptist is Elijah who was to come. I don't know how much clearer a statement of reincarnation you can get, but if you tell a pastor that, I mean, you're in trouble. And you know, I'm looking up things that I can find, and I found a paper about reincarnation written obviously by a theologian, and he's basically taking everything that every ancient church father in Greek said about reincarnation and saying they really didn't say that. They really didn't believe in it. And, you know, I find that to be, I guess I would call it theological gymnastics, where somebody makes a clear statement and somehow they figure out how to twist that statement into saying the opposite of what it said. And they use the Bible to justify that. But the point I'm making is one thing John said about people believing in this stuff. Michael Shermer, I'm sure a lot of us have heard his name. He's a very famous atheist. He had an experience where he married a woman, and her grandfather had given her a transistor radio, or she had obtained this transistor radio that had belonged to her grandfather. And sometime after they got married, they walked into the house and they heard music playing. And they found out it was this radio, this transistor radio that she had received from her grandfather. And Michael Shermer wrote a piece for Scientific American where he admitted that this was a very strange event, and he had to admit that there were some things out of the ordinary that he couldn't explain. But within about a year, he wrote another article for Scientific American and said this kind of stuff never happens. It just doesn't happen. So here you have an example of a belief system that is so rigid that even when you get incontrovertible evidence that is contrary to the belief system, it doesn't take very long for the belief system to kick back in and say, nope, that didn't happen because it doesn't fit our belief system. So one of the things I would say is if you're going to believe something, have some objective evidence that you can point to and repeatedly refer to that validates your belief system. I mean, you can believe anything you want. I mean, you can believe like the guy who says he who dies with the most toys wins. I mean, I'm not sure what that's worth as far as ultimate reality. But you know, my suggestion would be to find something to believe in that you can find regular validation for, that supports what you believe, that you can point to and say, yeah, that happened. I believe this to be this way, and this happened this way, so it has to be true, or whatever, something like that. Just believing in something because you want to doesn't make it true. You need, there's an element of evidence that has to be there.
Well, I wasn't thinking of getting up, but John prodded me to do it. Some of the things I'm going to say I've said before, but I think it's fitting with this presentation. There was a German paratrooper, I've told you about this before, who went out of an airplane at 3,500 feet over Rhein-Main Air Force Base back in, I think, the 60s. And his parachute didn't open, and he landed right in the concrete runway. The so-called, and I'll put it that way as hard as I can, laws of physics and physiology would say something very obvious. He'd be crushed and dead, and there'd be blood all over the runway. Well, that evening, when the astonished reporters were interviewing him, sitting up alertly in his hospital bed with his one broken leg and a bunch of bruises and no other internal or external injuries, they said, well, how in the world did you survive that fall? And he responded, well, our instructor taught us how to land right. And he taught us that if we did land right, we could survive any fall. I knew how to land right. I knew I was going to land right, and I knew I was going to survive. And the strength in all of his emotions and consciousness that he put behind that created his immediate future. Which indicates to me that we're always constantly creating our futures. But the main thing about it is we leave the back door open and we just let all of this belief of humanity in as if it's reality. I think one of the most important films ever made was The Matrix. Now, we're not hooked up to electronic devices being fed an artificial consciousness like the film illustrated, but I am totally convinced that this is an illusion. And I don't really want to go into the whole thing of that, but I had an experience when I was 15 when I almost died. I was in the last few moments when I was awakened 3 times in a row and essentially told to get up and start praying. Then I had no memory from about 7 until noon, when I came back and watched this white cloud disappear and daylight appear and the room materialize around me and then all the things in the room. And I realized while that was going on that I was both observing and undergoing that process we all do of falling asleep back into this unreal dream of physical experience. I've never doubted that since. And I know of people, and I, like the one I just explained to you, I've had other experiences where there has been very marked healing from prayer. You know, David Bohm was a physicist in England, and I had a book where he was interviewed, and he started talking about a thing he called sudden insight. And he said it can only happen if you can get your consciousness completely silent. Even thinking about not thinking will interfere with it. But if you can get into 100% listening mode of total silence, then sudden insight could happen. And here this physicist says, sudden insight to him completely explains instantaneous healing through prayer. I know a number of people who've experienced that kind of thing.
Remote viewing?
That's another area. We are all capable of that. Remote viewing is something that if we put ourselves into the right procedure and consciousness, we can go anywhere in space and in time and see what was going on then. And I joined a little group that was being taught that years ago and was learning it. And one experience I had when I was a complete beginner of it just absolutely convinced me that this is so powerful. I mean, the military worked on that a lot, and so did the Russian military. They can read a book in a locked vault if they want to. I'm totally convinced of that by the amount of detail that I got on one experience that was of seeing a whole cathedral and all the details of it and the yard and the river by it and just everything from a postcard that had been sealed in an envelope that was handed to me with a 5-digit number written on it. My target was that 5-digit number. Remote viewing is very powerful. So is reverse speech analysis. Look into these things. We all, when we're talking, our subconscious is also talking by encoding in the sound that I'm making right now another language. It's English, although some of mine came out to be German. But I've learned German, so that doesn't surprise me. But David Oates, who discovered this, is absolutely convinced that the subconscious that speaks in our reverse speech constantly, all of us have been doing that tonight, cannot and will not lie or deceive. And he has demonstrated that by, in Australia, analyzing the reverse speech of a man who was thought to be a suspect in the murder of a teenage boy, and he was saying, oh, poor kid, I heard about that. That was just awful. And the police bypassed that man, but he reversed his speech on that presentation on TV. And in his reversals, he was saying, like, hate the little SOB, kill the little, guy. He took that to the police and showed it to them. And they renewed their investigation of that man, and eventually he was convicted of the murder. Reverse speech analysis is far more accurate than polygraphs. And there's more and more to that. The human consciousness is where it is. It's not out there. There is one teacher that I read, and her statement was, there is nothing going on outside of your own consciousness. And when you can have as much control as that paratrooper had through his consciousness, then by golly, you need to listen to that statement that lady wrote. There's nothing going on outside of your own consciousness. We project our future. Read the book The Secret, or watch the DVD. I've mentioned this before too. There was an illustrator, one of the people who contributed to it when he was a young boy. He just started obsessing with the idea, gosh, when I grow up someday I want a beautiful house. And he thought about that and thought about it every day, and then he saw this magazine picture, full page of a beautiful house. Cut it out, pinned it on his wall, and just looked at it and just dreamed about that every day. Well, he was a teenager, and then he grew up and went through college and all that, moved out to California, met a woman, they got married, they had a little boy. Then they decided to buy a house, and so they bought a house and moved into it. And their boy was helping unpack the boxes, and he found that old magazine sheet picture in the box, and he brought it up to his dad and said, Daddy, what's this? The very address they were moving into at that moment. That is how much he projected his future. We have the ability to control all of the functions of our bodies. Healing comes through our consciousness. And an example, and I think it was Harvard, that some guys did a little experiment. They blindfolded a guy and tied him up, and they said, we're going to kill you. We're going to cut your arm and let you bleed to death. And they made a feeling that it felt like a cut. They didn't cut him. And they dropped lukewarm water on him and said, you're bleeding to death. You're bleeding to death. And without losing a drop of blood, he died. And they were all just heartbroken. They had no idea. But that's the power of human consciousness. There have been so many instances where people's lives have been totally changed by their consciousness. So that's, to me, where to look.
Well, I want to thank you for your presentation. I have a belief system, and it kind of parallels somewhat to yours. And most religions are designed to try to teach people how to live and how to treat each other. That's what religion is to me. Is this is what you are to do with your neighbor. You should treat your neighbor the way you want to be treated. And like something John was talking about, how you can control stuff with your mind. The Bible says if you ask God and you have faith to move the mountain, you will. Now, I don't know whether they have that kind of faith, but all that's ethics is very close to religion. I think ethics emanated from religion, from my perception, because I've done a little study about ethics, and I see so much unethical behavior in society that involves I'm not as far out in perception of my conscious level is less than some of the gentlemen who articulated theirs on this whole issue. Because within my mind, what I feel, religion is, when I study the Bible and what it teaches you, if we follow that, the world would be totally different and better. And so that's why I say it's a tool that we should use to deal with our neighbors fairly. And that's what I see. Now, I don't go by trying. I do have faith. I generally accept what the Bible says about faith and God and the Trinity and all that. That's pretty much my take on this whole thing. Confucianism, I know just very little about that, but I can I can see what you were saying, and I agree with that. It seemed like Confucianism may be more dealing with ethics. But you can pray all night. If you don't get up and do nothing, nothing's going to happen. You've got to have both prayer and action. And that's what I guess some people believe are great players. But the biggest problem I see in religion is the way we practice it. And that's the big problem. We profess one thing, we practice something else. But that's not the religion, that's the individual, that's us. So that's the problem I have, and that's why I say this religion, if it's misinterpreted and misunderstood, it can create more harm than help. But that's still not the religion, that's the person that's interpreted. And when I see like some of our outstanding ministers in the Dallas, Reverend Jeffries, First Baptist President, he makes some iteration that really bothers me to hold himself up as a religious person. Even the evangelicals in their support for our president, I can't see that connection. They're supposed to be the most religious people in the world and what they buy into. So that's part of it. We take religion like we do laws and regulations, try to make it fit what we want it to be. And I'm not really above that. There's some elements of religion I kind of package it the way I can deal with it better, but that may not be the right thing. So that's the problem I have with religion, is it's interpreted. We all one time just had a Catholic church in not all over the world, but in most of the Western. And the Catholic Church became very corrupt, selling of indulgences. And then Martin Luther and John Calvin got involved, and we had the Protestant Reformation. And many of our founding fathers left Europe to come to the New World so they could have religious freedom. And when they got here and got set up, Roger Williams had to leave and go to Rhode Island because they didn't like what he was saying. And others went to Connecticut and things like that. So, we criticize someone for doing something, we do the same thing, and we get in control. And that's the problem. I don't see religion having that kind of flexibility, particularly when it harms people. So it's not the religion, it's the people who practice religion based on our interpretation, which may be wrong. I don't think there's nothing wrong with it. You follow what's in the Bible, you're in good solid ground, I believe. But if you try to interpret to fit your own things you want to do, I think that's where we get on the wrong track. Now, I don't know that much about Buddhism, but I have a good much study about ethics, and I think it would be real good if everybody was ethical. Thank you.
Yes, you did. I just wanted to add one thing to what you had to say, Calvin. In history, as far as I know, the longest lasting civilization on earth was the ancient Egyptian civilization that lasted from about 8,500 to 3,500 BC in great peace and prosperity. Now, they had many gods and goddesses. But Jesus was asked by his disciples, why are you teaching those people in parables? And he essentially said, well, because they're first graders and you're sixth graders. You learn math, starting with arithmetic and going on up to calculus and so forth. Everybody is growing, hopefully. In ancient Egypt, they had many gods and goddesses that divided up the different ideas of spiritual consciousness applied to this and that and the other parts of life. Well, there was this one goddess, Ma'at, M-A-At. And whenever the priestess would say that Ma'at gave an edict last night, they would often become national law. Two of those laws in ancient Egypt were always speak the truth to everyone. If you lied to someone, you violated national law and you could be punished for it. Another was always treat everyone in a kindly manner. You're rude or mean to somebody, you violated national law and you were penalized for that. this led to this extreme period of peace and prosperity. And this went on, as I say, for 5,000 years. However, I met an Egyptian the other day working at a business who we started talking, and I mentioned this. He was a Coptic Christian, and I need to study that up. I don't know what a Coptic Christian is. But he said that it actually lasted longer than 5,000 years. In any event, I think that those two principles expressed more of what we call Christianity than most of what I see in the world today. These principles don't need a label if they're properly applied, because they're universal principles that have always been there and were there long before we decided to call this religion that or that religion that. These are universal, eternal principles. And it's based on the most important concept that here's another thing. You know, I've mentioned this before too. Why we say Amen at the end of a prayer? It is in honor of the first leader of a nation to declare to his people that there is only one God, and that God is love. That was Amenhotep IV, known also as Tutankhamun. And he, by saying that, put all the priests and priestesses out of business, and they didn't like it, so they eventually had him banished. But in any event, that's where that comes from. It's not an English word. It's these simple principles, just like Helen was saying, of how we take what we believe and apply it to other people. And that's where things like do unto others as you would have them do unto you would come. However, that actually comes from ancient Egyptian, which was do unto others as they would have you do unto them, which to me is more advanced in its concept. It's looking into their needs rather than judging everything by your own standards. So there's a lot more that can be studied and learned about the simple principles of the most important single quality of the universe, and that's divine love.
Okay, well, as the profound skeptic of these things, my observation actually, even from a child, I was because in England everyone has to go to school, of course, and everyone has to learn the Bible and read it and recite it. So I can say that I've read the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. So I understand. Now, when I heard because a lot of these stories, I must say I was skeptical, and it surprised me that the adults actually believe these things. But apparently they did. The other fact of the family was that my grandfather on my mother's side married a Catholic, and after the First World War, there was ongoing recession, and work was hard to come by. Anyway, he was a salesman for food, actually, my grandfather. Well, of course, food spoils, and so he would have food left over, and he'd bring it home. Anyway, my grandmother's sisters, Catholic sisters, thought they weren't getting their share of it, and so they wrote to the company and told them that he was stealing. And so from that point, none of the children were brought up to be Catholics. I mean, that was it. In fact, my grandfather was reduced to being a janitor. In fact, he died on New Year's Eve, and my mother talks about taking him some food. And so really religion from that point has a sort of a negative connotation. And I, of course, regard the Old Testament as just a bunch of history about the culture of the Jews. The fact that they believed in a single God to me is neither here nor there. Now the message from the New Testament, which talks about love and helping people, is a totally different message. And I think it comes from a totally different source. It's got nothing to do with the Jews, actually. It has more to do with Eastern religion. And I think you can see that. And so what really alarms me the most over here, people talk about being very religious and believing in the Almighty, And yet when you see what they do, they're not Christians at all. And I see these politicians passing laws that actually hurt the ordinary American. You know, like Trump is going to cut, you know, the entitlement programs and so on. And you see that in England with right-wing parties. I mean, you had David Cameron, who was supposed to be portrayed himself as, you know, like the workers' champion. Well, the first thing he did was to cut benefits to the disabled and so on. And so this is what I see. People believe, by the way, people believe what they want to believe. And they got it fixed in their minds and so on. And they kid themselves that by going to church and praying, that makes them good. Well, I think as Calvin just said, it's not what you believe, it's how you behave to each other. Now this morning there was a program on between 6 and 7, there was a medical program, and about spontaneous remissions and people suddenly being cured of cancer. And the general thought, the upshot of the doctor said that basically it's when people actually change their mode of behavior towards other people. Actually, when they actually start, you know, going out and being more compassionate and helping others and being more community-minded, that has a great influence. Really, it's again, so the mind really does have a great deal of influence over the body, as we know. So that seems to be borne out.
That's your opinion.
Well, actually, the doctor said that he's seen
That's
this.
his opinion.
Well, right, it's his
Not
opinion.
true.
Right, fine. Well, my opinion. You have a time. You have 5 minutes to say your piece. Remember, it's only one thought at a time. Right?
Forgive me.
Right. So you're welcome to speak afterwards. So I actually, you know, I'm a physicist. By training and thought. We know a lot about, you know, the beginning of the universe. We know for a fact that there's matter and antimatter, and it's very finely balanced. In fact, matter, when it meets antimatter, would explode and cancel it out, actually. It's the fact that there's more positive matter than antimatter is a very curious thing. Now, I don't happen to believe in a supreme being, but what I do know is there does seem to be a life force, and there does seem to be a force of energy that created the universe. Now, I think that most of these notions that people go, you know, are purely what they want to believe. I mean, it makes them happy, and no doubt it helps them. But personally, I think it's hogwash, mostly. And it has been used for very bad purposes. And there's a famous physicist who said that bad men do bad things and good men do good things. But it takes religion to make good men do bad things. And I see that all the time.
That's true.
And you know, you see these people wearing religion on their sleeve over here. That doesn't happen in Europe. I mean, people don't go around wearing religion on there because they'd be laughed at, really. You know, because, and I you know, religion's fine, but you can believe what you want to believe, but you should never be able to force your views, religious views, on others. To me, that's a crime and evil. And this is what we see in this country. That one brand of people want to force anti-abortion and so on and so forth, and other, you know, cultural things on people. And I think that's evil. So I think a lot of religion comes from evil. You look in the Middle East, they've been fighting each other for centuries, for millennia. One religious faction wants to kill off another faction. And we see it on the streets of London. Muslims come, and the dearest thing they want to do sometimes is kill people, and it happens, and it's all in the name of religion. You know, now, if that's not evil, I don't know what is. But, you know, the tenets of Christianity says, yes, we must help each other, love one another, and get along with each other. And fine, I'll accept that.
This man
my hogs are clean. If it's hogwash.
Well, actually, I was going to get up to counter something Albert said, but now John spoke, so. You know, there's a lot to critique about religion. And when I did some work for Mel Gibson back in 2005, I missed the dungeon tour. I will say that Stone Mansion there in Greenwich, Connecticut, it had a lot of memorabilia from Braveheart, not as much from The Passion, which had just been recently produced and been in the theaters. But the conference that I was doing audio and video for was actually regarding The Passion, and there were clergy from all over the world who were there. And the main note, really, of that, and I spoke about this just slightly when the gentleman was talking about astronomy and astrological factors a couple of weeks ago here at the College of Complexes. But the general Catholic approach is dogma. And there came a question of which rite was better. Was the Tridentine rite better? Should Catholics be practicing the Tridentine rite, or is it okay for them to perform the Novus Ordo? And my comment was, well, don't you have a good old Irish priest with second sight who can tell you, which one of these masses is really efficacious? One, is there one that is and one that isn't? And then they're like, no, it's all a doctrinal issue. Well, see, I kind of come from the paranormal approach. I will say this, is that despite John's position on things, is in 2006 I was doing a conference for the American Society of Dowsers, who were having their meeting here in Dallas, and Betty Epstein, a fine Jewish lady, good friend of mine, puts on the conference. She was president of ASD for a while. And we had 3 rooms we were running. I'm videotaping in 3 different rooms. And one of the attendees really kind of pissed me off. I was laying some audio cable and taping it down, and he came into the room and he watched me taping, and he said, you really seem to spend a lot of time on your knees. I just took that the wrong way, I really did. That could have some meanings, in our culture today that just don't really, and especially that particular Franciscan, which I kind of described to somebody as a faggy little Franciscan, pardon me. But there was an interesting thing that happened. I was, not only did that piss me off, but then the fact that he was teaching a class on marriage counseling. This is a celibate priest, never been married, who's teaching married people how to get along. And I am like, this is just so out there. Some gentleman there was taking pictures with his new DSL camera that had expanded spectrum, and it caught the light from more than our eyes can see. It was kind of catching it a little bit in the infrared and ultraviolet and so forth. The hallway where the guy snapped a picture had about 30 people in the hallway, and there in the middle of the hallway was that faggy little Franciscan priest. He had a halo like you would see in the old artwork of the Middle Ages. The really politically incorrect thing is not anybody else in that hallway had a single glimmer of light. Okay, well, I asked for a copy of that snapshot, that photo there, but the political problem was the guy who snapped the picture was Jewish. Do you think I ever got that picture? So I'm just saying is there's there's a reality of a physicist, and then there are realities beyond that reality. Thank you.
I know I'm boring you. John, you reminded me of something. I used to be involved with Betty and the Dowsers and all of that. And when I went to one of her first meetings, we were all to bring a little under $5 unmarked Christmas gift because it was a party before Christmas. And then we were all to go individually while we were meeting in her family room, all around in the living room and front room of her house, and hide our gift under a pillow or behind the curtain or wherever. So everybody did that. There were probably about 30 different ones. And then individually we were to, during the evening, go out there and douse for a gift. Well, you know, I didn't know much about it, so I didn't figure I wanted to do that right away. And it was towards the end of the meeting, and we'd kind of gotten up, and I was standing just inside of one of the rooms and talking with this lady that I had met there. And she said, well, did you find your gift yet? And I said, well, no, I haven't looked for one yet, but since we've been talking here, there was this table behind the couch, and there was a kind of a porcelain Father Christmas there. I said, I just have a feeling that my gift is going to be under that Father Christmas. She said, well, look. And I picked it up, and there was a little gift, and it was the gift that she had brought. I don't believe in coincidences either. Too many things happen.
At least he got his gift.
I guess I'm the last one standing. I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job here tonight. Got us all thinking, and it was quite interesting and quite on target. In life, we all bring something together to make things better for humanity, as you might say. Each of us has a story to tell. Each of us has something we bring to this college of complexes or wherever we happen to meet. And my own background was in labor and fighting against corporations and trying to get things better for the working people. And I guess I'm 79 years old. In the 79 years I've lived, I've learned a lot of things. But trying to put it all together and say, I would say this, John he's an economist, he understands that. I studied economy, it was my major in college. We have a society that's in trouble. And our capitalism has to be harnessed in order to work for the benefit of people. Otherwise, it's destructive of the general welfare, which under our Constitution we are obliged to protect. That's something to remember. And that is part of what I bring to this, and trying to make things a little better tomorrow for everybody than it was yesterday. And it's like, if the purpose of regulation was never to put the government on the backs of people, but to harness the forces of profit and greed and make it work for society instead of against it. Making the money, the running choo-choo trains, disappearing over the horizon, your teepee full of money, looking for greater pastures to exploit. That is the opposite of regulation. The absence of regulation leads to the free enterprise of burglars, so we have to avoid that. And that's about all I have to offer to add to what you had to say. Anyway, I think you did a great job, and you get the last word. You get to respond to all these remarks we made and close this meeting. Come on up here.
Several of you have mentioned the word religion, and people have strong feelings about religion. So my background in anthropology, I was thinking from an anthropological point of view, what are the roots of religion? And both from anthropology or from my personal reflection, I can think of three sources of religion. One source is human beings are limited in a sense that sometimes we feel powerless, especially when we encounter mortality and encounter the natural disasters that think about 10,000 or 1 million years ago when there were no houses, there were no protection, no electricity. We were at the mercy of nature. And when we were at the mercy of nature, we sometimes we would feel powerless. We will worship some kind of supernatural deities because the limitation of individuals. That's one source of religion. And the other source of religion actually is the need for cooperation. The need for cooperation, and I think the word of religion has a connotation of connection, to bind, connection. In a society without socially prescribed ethics, without cooperation, it is very difficult to survive. So actually, the original teachings of religion is to teach love and cooperation, to ensure the survival of the group. But unfortunately, many times that some people, ambitious people, people with their own agenda, they hijack the religion, hijack the what was supposed to be loving, cooperative elements of religion into something that will serve the purpose of those ambitious, selfish individuals and make other people as their tools to fulfill the political agenda of some people. So that's the kind of not intended the aspect of religion. So religion in that sense can be a source for good or source for great conflict. It is up to us to how we apply the fundamental principles of real religion. It's even like science. Science can work for good, and science can bring great destruction. With science, we have great medicine. With science, we have developed bombs, more sophisticated bombs to destroy lives. So it's up to us to make the better use of technology or religion. So that's one comment on religion. Actually, the simplest ethics or religion is the golden rule that several of you mentioned. It's universal, expressed in different ways, to treat others as you want to be treated. And the Chinese have another way of saying is don't treat others if you don't want them to treat you that way. It's just kind of saying in another way, if you don't want to be treated that way, you don't treat other people like this. So this is what is called reciprocity. If we all practice reciprocity very simply, and the world will become a more peaceful world. And it's very simple, but there are always people who are selfish and ambitious, and they make use of the vulnerabilities of other people to realize their aims. That's unfortunately happen a lot. So I like to end by saying two things. One is follow the golden rule, and that is universal, and that's very understandable. Treat others as you want to be treated. And secondly is to realize that the universe is too great a mystery for there to be one single approach to it. So if we're open-minded, we always learn something new, and life become more interesting. So with these two principles, I think it helps us to lead a more interesting life, and also to promote peace and harmony in our community and in the world.
Well said.
Well said. Well, that's it for tonight, the end of our formal meeting. They kick us out of here at 10:30, just so you know, and our speaker is still here if you want to talk to her, and whatever. So hope to see you all next week. Thank you very much.